The Australian Music Vault is proud to welcome one of Australia's most loved, most enduring stars, from 1969's The Real Thing to last year's Red Dirt, Red Heart, Russell Morris.
Thanks, Brian. Well, come up to the lab, see what's on the slab. That's what it sounds like, the vault.
It does, it does.
Now, what's that from?
That is from the Halloween hit.
No, come up to the labs. Why don't you see what's on the slab?
Oh, I know. Rocky Horror.
Yes.
Because you played Riff Raff.
Yes, that's right.
For how long?
Played it for about 6 months.
Yeah, that was your theatre phase.
Yes, I quite enjoyed it, actually.
Did you?
The first 3 shows I hated because
Right.
I didn't know my lines properly. But once I'd learnt the lines, I felt I could live in the character.
Yeah.
And I sort of tried to play it more like Peter Lorre.
Right.
Was that a big Peter Lorre fan?
Was that the production with Wilbur?
No, Wilbur wasn't there. It was Glenn Shorrock.
Right.
It was Joe Daniels, an American, playing
Right.
Frankenfurter.
Right.
Ken James playing Brad.
Ken James.
Yes. And it was really interesting. It was a very funny show.
And was that around the same time you did Jesus Christ Superstar?
No, Jesus Christ Superstar was after that.
Was a bit later.
It was when I played Simon the Likeable.
Right. Now, I want to ask you the opening question. Is there a connection between the music you're making now and the music you were making in the 60s?
Yes, there is, but most people don't see it. I started playing blues, rhythm and blues, and Tamla Motown. That was the band that I was in, and we played all that sort of stuff. Came across Ian Meldrum, who said, listen, let me produce your records, let me manage you, let me do this. He directed us down a path which was more commercial. And it turned out that he was right, because we had all these hits. And then The Real Thing came along, and we thought, wow, this is something. You know, he knows what he's doing. So I didn't think about my blues or rhythm and blues roots, which I loved. You know, like the very first Rolling Stones album was, to me, Nirvana for me. That's what set me on my path.
And the blues artists, were you a fan of, who did you like? Howling Wolf?
John Lee Hooker's probably my favourite. Yeah, Howling Wolf I like. Of course, Robert Johnson, everyone loves Robert. But I used to like Blind Willie McTell because of his high voice. And but we left that, and I started doing what I was doing. And I always, in the back of my mind, wanted to hark back to doing something bluesy. So no one really knows this, but after The Real Thing, all my earlier songs and recordings, the band that played on them all was my favourite Australian band, Chain. So you listen to Sweet Sweet Love and you say to a real blues fan, oh, your Chain played on this, they'd go, oh, yeah, get off it. Because it's such a schmaltzy sort of song. But the band, they did it. Chain played on all those songs. And I loved them dearly. I thought they were the best band, and I wanted to be like them, you know.
So Phil Manning,
Barry Sullivan and Barry Harvey.
Yeah, was it Big Goose?
Big Goose and Little Goose.
Right.
Yeah.
And what about, was Matt Taylor involved? Or?
Matt played harp on a couple of things, yeah. I think on Jail Jonah's Daughter he played harmonica, yeah.
What a great character.
Oh,
Matt Taylor.
They were fantastic. I loved them, and I always harked back in my mind. Thinking I'd love to go back and do something like that. Yeah. And what happens is you become set in your ways, and you think, I've been successful this way, and you keep trying to recook the same pie and use the same ingredients each time, and you think, well, and all of a sudden it goes flat. It sort of doesn't come out of the oven. It hasn't got any lift. It's like you didn't put any self-raising flour in it. Yeah. And I kept doing albums that I thought were better and better and better, but the public and radio just sort of zoned off me.
And how was that for you?
Coming
from a position like that, when The Real Thing came out, and we'll get to that in a moment in detail, but The Real Thing in 1969, The Girl That I Love, Sweet Sweet Love, I mean, you were a major Australian pop star. How did you cope with not being?
You tend to get a little bit hurt. You go onto your back foot, but also I'm a realist and I'm pragmatic, and I would look at the market and I'd say I'm really lucky and really grateful for my time in the sun, and that's how I thought. And I thought, well, I've had my time in the sun. The only thing I can dream of now is maybe writing a song that someone from The Voice or X Factor might do. And so I was still writing poppy type of songs because I'd been dancing, which I call it the Pied Piper dance. You run after the Pied Piper, but he's already left and you're trying to catch him. It's like trying to catch a ship that's already left. So a lot of acts will see Cold Chisel, I'll see Ed Sheeran. They go, oh, I've got to be like him. Or the record company is also pressuring, we need another Ed Sheeran. But it's too late. You can't do that.
Yeah.
That's gone. So you're actually chasing the donkey that's gotten out of the shed and you can't catch him, or you can't catch the Pied Piper. So I was doing that. And I'd done about 5 albums and they all sunk without a trace. And Jim Keys, my dear friend, said to me, when are you doing another album? I said, are you serious? I said, I'm not doing another one. He said, why not? I said, because it costs me a lot of money. No one plays it. No one hears it. And he said, but you have an obligation. I said, what are you talking about? He said, you have an obligation. He said, if you were a master craftsman, which you are, but you made cabinets or desks, but really fine crafted desks, what would you do? Stop making them? You'd make another one. If you couldn't sell it, you'd put it in a warehouse. Wow. He said, it's your body of work. And the most important line there is body of work. He said, you have an obligation to do it. I said, all right, smart Alec. I said, well, I'm about to do another album. I said, you'll probably laugh, but I want to go back to what I started doing. I want to do the blues. And of course, Jimmy, I love the blues. It's my favourite music, you know. I said, all right, big mouth, you need to write a song with me. So he said, I'd love to. So I went to Sydney and I started writing some stuff before I got with Jimmy, and it felt a bit hollow because I was trying to copy my heroes like John Lee Hooker, I love him. And I was trying to, and it just didn't connect with my soul, and I couldn't work out why. Because I thought they were pretty good songs. And I went to Sydney and I was reading the newspaper, and in the colour supplement was a photograph from 1916 of an Australian criminal who'd been arrested. And his name was Thomas Archer and his nickname was Shark Jaws. And the photo was so powerful that I had to keep it. It was almost like it reached out through the pages and grabbed me. And I brought it back to Melbourne. One Sunday afternoon, I'm sitting there looking at it, and I know I'm a child of the 60s, and I know maybe people think I took a lot of chemicals, but it almost communicated to me. It almost said, write a song about me, son. Tell people I lived and breathed, and I scared the buggery out of everybody. So I wrote that song, and it was almost like a neon light went off in my head. And I thought, no wonder I'm not getting the blues, because I'm trying to write about Mississippi, New Orleans. I never picked any cotton. I don't understand. I can appreciate what they're writing about, but
it's not you.
It's not me, and it's not our roots. And I thought blues music is every bit applicable to Australian stories as it is to American stories. So that's why, once I'd written that song, then I went round to Jimmy and I said, right, I've got a riff and this is the song I've got. And we finished that song, and then it went on to Squizzy Taylor and it went on to all those characters. And that is our blues and roots, you know. And for me to write about living in Tennessee is like, it's fake.
It's ridiculous.
It's fake. You've got to write about, if it's roots music, it's got about what your ancestors went through and where they were and what they suffered, you know. Yeah. And that's how that came about. And I didn't think it'd be successful. I pressed 500 copies and we were going to sell them at shows because every record company in Australia turned it down. Even when I offered my old publishing for free, they all turned it down. And
did they give you any little hint of, oh, we're sorry, or maybe if you could reshape it?
No, they were very kind. They were respectful. No,
yes.
I'm not the type of person to hold a grudge.
No.
But I understood their commercial leanings. They wanted something that was going to sell. They didn't want to sink money into something that had 5 albums and they'd all sunk without a trace.
Of course.
So they all turned it down. And I thought, you know, I've had my time in the sun, but I'm really happy with this album. I'll sell it at the shows and people might like it, and I'll press 500 and that'll get me part of the money back.
Yeah.
So at the 11th hour, a record company came out of nowhere and said, we'll take it. So they took it and it was released, and everyone had said it'll never be a success. And I said, I don't care. I've never had any success in the last 30 years. Why would I stress? 3 months it sat there, and then all of a sudden a little bit of fire started to kindle, and the fire got bigger and bigger and bigger. And
who started that fire?
I think it was people like Billy Pennell.
Yeah.
Some of the community radio, because it never
Triple
ever
R.
got played on.
No, Triple M.
Triple M, Triple J or Fox or any of those. I'm too old to be played on those stations.
Yeah.
And it was ABC and also the community stations.
Yeah.
And it just started to get some traction. And this small record company was distributed through EMI Universal. And once they smell blood in the water, they can smell it. And they went after it. And it just went like crazy. It just took off. And it was the biggest seller in 2013, biggest Australian album.
Yeah.
So from expectations of nothing and expectations of just loving the art form that I was doing, something came out of it, which was really interesting.
Beautiful. Let us go back. Let us go way back to your first band. Now, was your first band Somebody's Image?
That's right, yeah.
Tell us about Somebody's Image.
Somebody's Image was a band that formed when I was at school, and they were mates of mine. And I wasn't in the band, I was just their friend.
Oh.
And we would have parties and everyone would sit around and sing songs, and the singer was Ronnie Charles. And when they were about to launch, a band called Jackson Kings, who were working pretty regularly, poached Ronnie from the band and took him, along with Brian Cadd. And then the group, the GROOP, poached the both of them, and they joined the group. And the guys in the band came to me and said, will you sing with us?
Had you done any singing?
No.
You knew you could sing?
No. And I'm not being falsely humble here. I really didn't have a lot of confidence in what I was doing. And I'll tell you a story about that in a minute. But they said, just join us for Christmas, because I said, no, I want to finish what I'm doing at Swinburne, because I was doing a business course. And I joined for Christmas, and it really got under my skin, and I really loved it. And that's when we started doing all the blues stuff and the Rolling Stones things, and to the point that Brian and Ronnie came around to see us rehearse, and we were rehearsing in a house at Eric, the drummer's. I couldn't even stand in the same room and sing. So I took the microphone lead and went out into the kitchen and stood in the kitchen. Brian will tell you the story if you ask him. I couldn't face them.
But that's the hard, don't you reckon, performing in front of friends?
It was
performing
terrible.
in front of strangers is fine.
It is. It's
in front of friends.
But even in front of strangers, I was really scared at first. And
but obviously people liked what you were doing.
Yeah, it gave me encouragement, yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
And the first hit was Hush.
No, the first minor hit we had was When I Come Home.
Right.
With Heatwave on the other side.
Okay. And whose was that, When I Come Home?
Heatwave was a Martha and the Vandellas song, and When I Come Home was Spencer Davis.
Okay. But then Hush was the big one.
Hush was the big one.
Who found that song?
Reg Varney, I think it was.
Reg Varney?
Yeah.
Not the one off the buses.
No. That was
on the buses?
Yeah. Is it Reg Varney?
That's...
Yeah, but he was... Or it was the guy that ran W&G Records who we were signed to. He found it. I'm getting old now. Grey matters.
But that's a hell of a song.
Great song, Joe South song.
Yeah. Yeah. But your version, Somebody's Image version, was pretty special. Yeah,
it's funny. If you listen to it, I couldn't get the words off the record. I couldn't work out what they were. And the second verse is... no, it's the first verse. So there's a certain little girl that's on my mind. No doubt about it, she looks so fine. I couldn't work out what he was saying.
So what did you sing?
We got your body. She looks so fine. If you listen to the record, you can hear it. There's a certain little girl that's on my mind. We got your body. She looks so fine. Because I couldn't I had no idea what
So
they
what
were.
do you sing now?
No doubt about it.
You
now.
got the real lyric.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so therefore, how did you move from somebody's image to a solo career?
The band was sort of disintegrating within themselves. Les, the bass player, and the drummer were more into the Max Merritt type of sound. They wanted to do Max Merritt.
Yeah.
And the two guitar players were jazz players. They wanted to play jazz. And the band was sort of falling apart. And Eric, unfortunately, had a brain hemorrhage when we were in Sydney, and he was very ill, so we replaced him with Steve Hopgood from the Masters Apprentices.
Right.
And Steve Hopgood took me aside one night and said, you should go solo. And I said, no, I can't do that. I said, I've got a thing with the guys. And he said, they're already working out ways to split the band up. They're all going in different directions. You really have to think about this. So Ian Meldrum had been overseas and he came back because he'd gone overseas with the group.
Yes.
And he came back and I went to him and I said, this is what I want to do. And he said, you selfish little rat. He said, I'll go and speak to the boys. And he went and spoke to the band and he came back and he said, yeah, you should leave. Okay. So we then started, he said, you can't go back to what you wanted to do. We've got to find something commercial. So we started recording songs. We'd done 2 songs and at that stage, John Farnham was big. Ronnie Burns was big, Normie Rowe.
The Masters.
Yeah, I'm talking mainly solo artists.
66. Are we?
No, later,
67.
68, 69. Yeah, 68
Right.
probably. And we'd recorded 2 songs and Ian and I were driving up Punt Road, I remember. And I said, Ian, I don't want to be a pop star. I said, these songs, any one of the other guys out there could record them, couldn't they? He said, yes. I said, I want to be different. I don't want to do that. Oh, what's wrong with you? And then I said, all right, if you heard one of those songs on the radio, you would go, this is going to change my life. And he went, you're right. He said, you're 100% right. He said, we need to find something that's different, left of field.
Yeah. Did you think about writing that song?
Oh, I'd started writing, but I was still insecure about my own writing. Yeah. And when we ran into Johnny Young at Channel 10, he said, I've got these songs because I'd like you to consider doing them. So he played about 4 songs. Girl of Love was one of them. And I thought, yeah, it's nice, but it's still the same thing. Have you got anything else? No, not really. Oh, I've got this song that I've written for a band, but you couldn't possibly do it. You know, it's just not a solo artist song. Play it. He played it and Ian and I went, that's the one. And Johnny Young thought we were nuts. He said, why would you want to do this song? Because that's the one we want.
The real thing.
The real thing, yeah.
Was it presented to you in the version that we know? That's not how it sounded at the start. No,
it sounded like, which it still does if you play it up against it, from start to finish, full on, pictures of Matchstick Men.
Right.
And Ian realised that straight away.
Did he?
And said, right. And Johnny said, if you're going to do it, you've got to do it up from the start. And Ian said, you're banned from the studio. So Johnny was not allowed to come into the studio. And Ian was the total architect of that whole thing. He looked at it and he thought, right, we're going to make Hurdy-Gurdy Man meets I Am the Walrus.
Yeah.
He said, that's what we're going to do. And he took it from that psychedelic finger-picking thing. And once it was a big hit, I thought, well, Ian's right. There's no point in me doing blues. This is really successful.
But all the phasing, do you call it? The flanging.
Phasing and flanging, yeah.
It was very experimental.
Yeah.
And he just kept throwing things in, is that right?
Well, it was a 3.5-minute song. That's what it was supposed to be. And the band that played on it was the group.
Yeah.
Because I became really good friends with them and Brian Cadd. And they played and they got to the end and the drummer, where they should have finished, did a drum fill and went into double time and started playing. And the engineer reached over to press the button and then said, no, let them have some fun, let them play. He said, we'll fade it. And they played to the point where the drummer virtually gave up and went cack, cack, cack and threw his sticks. And that was and Ian said, don't worry, we'll fade that. And that night, Ian rang me up and he said, I've got a brilliant idea. And I said, what? He said, we're going to make it 6.5 minutes long. I said, Ian, that's a bad idea. That's ridiculous. We're going to try and get airplay. No one's going to play a 6.5-minute song.
Yeah.
And he said, I'll make it like an EP with a little mark in the centre. When it gets there, the DJs can fade it. I said, yeah, that works, but what are you going to put for the last 3 minutes? I said, it's just, what are you going to do? And he said, sound effects. And I said, Ian, this is ridiculous. He said, trust me. And yeah, he pulled it off. Incredible.
I mean, what did he have there? He had a children's choir.
Children's choir. He had speeches from Adolf Hitler, supposedly Winston Churchill, but actually Winston Churchill is him.
Right.
He's go, we'll fight them on the beaches. We'll fight them on the landing. That's Molly.
That's
doing
Molly.
That. Yeah. And
Brian
Cadd reading the back of a tape box.
Oh my Lord.
And one of the great moments of the mix, because Ian took forever to mix it, drove us insane.
Yeah.
Every day we'd think we're finished, then he'd bring us back the next day to do it again. And the engineer was trying to isolate the piano sound. And as they do, they've got buttons on all the tracks.
Yeah.
And he said to me, oh, can you put your 4 fingers on those buttons there, because I want to punch everything out and just listen to the piano. And he said, okay, let's push it. And he pushed it and he pushed it right on that beat where it goes, dang, and everyone went,
Perfect.
perfect. Yeah, we've got to do that. So that was a fortuitous accident.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about the Mau Mau Mau? Was that part of Johnny Young's original song?
I'm not going to comment. Now, Ian says he came up with that, and I can't remember, to be honest.
Right.
But Ian put his he without Ian, that song never would have been anything.
Yeah.
And he got me to sing. I think it was supposed to be a guitar line.
Right.
And Ian got me to sing it. Yeah.
The genius of Ian Molly Meldrum.
Oh yeah, he was. He was incredible.
And that song, do you love it now? How do you feel about it now?
Oh, I have to love it. It's like one of your children, isn't it? And it's been really good to me.
Yeah.
And for many years, as I said, in that 30 years in the wilderness, if I was out in the ocean, I'd think, right, I'm going to swim out on my own. I'm going to do a new album. You swim out and all of a sudden the boat starts filling up with water and everything. Oh, you paddle out and your boat starts filling up with water and you've only got a life jacket. And you think, well, and you look around, there's a lighthouse and that's the real thing. So you paddle back and cling on to that for a while, because you can always cling on to it and sing it and people still love it.
People love it.
I still enjoy doing it.
Oh, that's good. Well, you sing it magnificently. Let's talk about the record company. So The Real Thing is a massive hit. Who comes up with part 3 into Paper Walls? Johnny Young again?
Yeah. Incidentally, which is an interesting point, twice in my career, record companies have turned me down and said what I've produced is rubbish, and they were the big... The Real Thing, EMI hated it.
You're joking.
They hated it. They thought it was the biggest load of rubbish they'd ever heard. They didn't want to release it. So Ian threatened to burn the tapes, and they said, well, we may release it just in Melbourne to try and get some of our money back. So Ian and I got in a car and drove up to Sydney and went to see all the programmers and played them and said, would you play it? And they said, yes, yes. So we had a petition to convince EMI to release it. They hated it. Then again, I go to the blues section, everyone hated that.
Yeah.
So...
And they did.
Don't listen to record companies.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So part 3 into Paper Walls, this is where Ian and I started to have fractures.
Right.
Because Ian said, "What we have to do something like The Real Thing, but we've got to do it bigger." And I said, Ian, it's like the economy. It can't keep getting bigger and bigger. We've got to go the other way. No, we've got to, people expect it. He said, I've got an idea. That song you wrote and the other song that Johnny Young wrote, we're going to combine them like the Beatles would do.
Day in the life.
Yeah, and I said, oh, gee. I said, listen, this is, this is sort of, it's just getting too big and too unwieldy. It's like Hannibal fighting with all those elephants. You know, you can't control the bloody things.
Yeah.
They run everywhere. And it got out of hand. And so we did it, and sure, it was a big hit, but Girl I Love was on the other side, and they flipped it. And I wasn't happy with the Girl I Love. I hated all the strings, and I hated all the choirs, and I wanted it to be just really simple with a guitar and probably 2 cellos.
Yeah.
And that was when Ian and I started ideologically starting to bat heads. And I kept saying, I'm not going that way anymore. I'm not going to be Davy Jones. I'm not going to go out on stage with beads around my neck and throw. I'm going to go and start writing my own stuff. And that's what happened. And I started to go out and write my own songs.
And had incredible hits, Sweet, Sweet Love, Mr. America, The Wings of an Eagle.
Yeah, all those songs. Yeah, they worked for me, worked really well.
Yeah.
So I was...
So Molly wasn't involved with those songs?
No.
Let's go to your travelling. You went to London first.
That's right, yeah.
On the back of The Real Thing?
Yeah.
And how was that?
That was... it was interesting. I had to meet with Robert Stigwood.
Oh.
We had a really good meeting and Molly happened to be in London. So he called me up and says, I have to see you. And I said, I've got a meeting. He said, I don't care what you've got all the... So we had a meeting and he kept me half an hour late for Robert Stigwood. Robert Stigwood was completely unimpressed.
Of course.
He thought, who is this guy that can dare turn up? So things went from bad to worse there. So I virtually came back with the view that I was going to write everything I did. Sink or swim on my own talent. And if I sunk, so be it. But I wasn't going to be dependent on looking for songs from other people anymore.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. And I came back and then started doing that. And then ended up going to England again with Paul Dainty and then going over to America and recording in America and doing some stuff there. And first album got great reviews in America and the second album didn't get great reviews. And then my stepfather had a heart attack, so I decided I better come home. So I came home. And
so how was America for you?
Good and bad.
Yeah.
Really, I had some great moments there.
Playing? Doing gigs?
No, you can't do gigs legally. You couldn't. So it was a lot of freebie gigs, but meeting great people and doing unbelievable things like... on hindsight, you see all the mistakes you made.
Yeah.
One was when I got an opportunity to sign to 2 different labels. One label didn't want me to do my own songs, but they said I could develop my own songs.
Yeah.
The other one said, yeah, we love your stuff. So I went with them. The first label was Clive
Davis.
Clive Davis.
Right.
And Clive Davis in the room with me, sat in the room with a chair, turned around and said, Russell, I love your voice. I've always loved your voice. I know about your stuff. He said, I don't hear that being a hit in America, but allow me to mould you into... And I went, no. So I went to bad decision. Bad decision. Second bad decision, I was recording and we had Lowell George come along to play slide.
From Little Feat?
Yeah, and I'm a big fan. So I'm sitting in the booth where his guitar, just listening to his blasting my head off.
Playing on your song?
Yeah. It was through Albert Lee, who's a mate of mine, and Albert Lee got him to come down. And he had this really attractive, sort of plumpish girlfriend, and I thought she was really pretty. I liked her. And we're talking and get along really well, and she sang some harmonies, and I said, wow, your voice. And she said, yeah, I like your voice too, it's purty. I said, oh, thanks. And we're talking and talking, and I should have said to her, listen, I'm new in town, can you introduce me to some of your friends?
Yeah.
I was too shy to do. But we started talking. I said, so you're a session singer? She said, oh, I guess so now. I don't know. I was in a band. I said, oh, yeah, a band, were you? And how'd you go? She said, oh, we had one hit, but, you know. And I said, what was it? She said, oh, you wouldn't know it. You're in Australia. I said, tell me what the hit was. And she saw a song called Distant Drum. And I went, Stone Ponies, they're my favourite. I love that song. I love that song. Linda Ronstadt, before she became the big star. Wow. I should have said to her, Linda, I don't know anyone in town.
Yeah.
Could you introduce... I would have met all the Eagles, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Joni Mitchell, it would have been Jackson Brown.
Yeah.
But I was just too shy to say, oh, can you help me out?
Oh, yeah.
And they're the big mistakes I made.
Oh, well. Let's jump forward. You came back from America. You had the Russell Morris band. You had the Rubes. Tell us about some of the players in those bands.
Oh, I had some great players in those bands. And that was when I was chasing the Pied Piper.
Yeah.
Because I came back and I knew I had to try and re-establish myself. I saw what was going on, so I tried to copy what other people were doing.
Yeah.
And I had the great James Black.
The great James Black.
Yes.
Yes.
In the band, and I was devastated when he left. But I had Joey Amenta, brilliant guitar player, Graham Thompson on bass, who ended up working with virtually everyone and now manages a number of artists, including Shane Nicholson. Keith Elliott on drums. And that was a great band.
And are you doing all originals, all your songs?
Yes.
You throw a few covers in from time to time?
No, I always kept one blues song in.
Right.
I would usually do Accuse Me or something like that. I would always keep one blues song.
Right.
All the way through everything.
Right.
Even when I was forced to join a cover band for about 7 years.
You were forced to?
What, to make a living? I was losing my house and everything, yeah.
So when was this? What period?
This would have been 70, no, it would have been, 80, from about 81 to about 87. It was a really hard time.
Right.
Struggling really bad.
Who was the cover band?
The Sweethearts.
Yeah. And what?
Lonely Boys first and then
Right.
the Sweethearts, yeah.
And what turned it around then? So what?
What happened was they did Jesus Christ Superstar and I got a minor part in that. And that people started, I guess people started to help me a little bit from there. And then Daryl Cotton rang me up and said, listen, I'm working at this little club in Hawthorne, Casey's, and they've asked me, would you like to come along and sing 5 songs? And I'll get Ronnie Burns to come down and sing 5 songs and see how it goes, you know. And I was really struggling for money at that stage. And he said, I think they said, oh, we'll give you $500. And I thought, yeah, that'll do.
Right.
So I rushed down there and we did it, big crowd, went well. They rang up the next week and said, would you do it again in a month? So he said, yeah, we'll do it again. It was fun. So we did it on a really freezing cold Melbourne night with an absolute terrible thunderstorm. And I thought, oh, this will be horrible. No one will be there. We got there and the line was around the block. I thought, wow. So we did the show. And after the show, Ronnie, Daryl and I got together and said, do you want to do this for, say, 3 months? So we did. And that went for 5 years, I think. And then Ronnie left. And then I got my great mate Jim Keys in, and Jimmy and we did that. And when Jimmy joined, all of a sudden they put Long Way to the Top on.
Right.
So Jimmy and I ended up going on to Long Way to the Top and doing that. That boosted things even further. Yeah. And then I started working some shows with Brian Cadd and then the rest of the time with Daryl and Jim. And then Jim and Daryl both got sick and unfortunately passed away.
Yeah.
And it was at that stage, Mitch Cairns, the bass player in the band, said, you really need to do another album. You've got to think about doing something here. And I'd written those songs with Jim and by myself.
Yep.
And I said, well, I've got these 4 blues songs that I've really... So we put them down, then ran them to the record company. No one interested. I said, I really love doing this. This is what I really want to do. So I got the money together and did a whole album. Did the rounds again, offered publishing. No, everyone turned it down.
Yeah.
So that's when all of a sudden it took off again.
Yeah.
And that's when it all changed.
Yeah. Tell us about, just really quickly, we're running out of time, a couple of lines, if you like, on each of those players. Firstly, let's go with Daryl Cotton.
Daryl Cotton, a heart of gold, always looking to help people. He was one of those guys that if he heard someone was sick, he would always contact them, find out how they were, but not just once. He would keep the follow-up going. He was a lovely guy, very, very generous.
And of course, he was in Zoot. He was
in Zoot, a great Australian band, you know, with Rick Springfield and B. Birtles. They all went on to do really big things. Yeah. And Rick Brewer on drums. Yeah. And then, of course, there's Jimmy Keys, my dear buddy who I spoke to on the phone every single day.
Really?
Every day we would talk.
Every day?
Yeah.
Just for a chat?
Yeah, and just to let him come up with some insult towards me. When we would fly, we'd check in, and you know how they say, have you got anything in your bag that's flammable or pointy or loose batteries.
Dangerous.
And he would say, no, but you better check his bag. And of course they go, what do you mean by that? And he'd say, well, he's lost his personality. Maybe it's in there. That was Jimmy. He would do that all the time. He was unbelievable. And he'd smoke. He'd walk out there and smoke in the foyer. And people would go, put that cigarette out. I can smoke it. He was just a rebel.
And were you aware of him in the Masters Apprentices? Were they were just before you, really, weren't they?
Yeah, they were before me. And we became really good friends. I became really good friends with them.
Yeah.
At the latter form of the Masters Apprentices, when Glenn Wheatley was in there, and Doug and Doggy, they became really good mates.
Yeah.
And so Jim and I have always been friends.
Yeah. Ronnie Burns.
Ronnie Burns, yes. Well, Ronnie and I were really close friends, and then he ended up going on a different path. He went down the path of like the Guru Maharaji, and they stayed they became a clique, and you didn't see them anymore unless you were part of that thing. And
no.
I've never been a follower of anything.
You've had friends who have been?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Never got close?
Never got close.
Never toyed with it? Never flirted with it?
No.
No.
Not even slightly. I'm not going to follow anyone that's mortal.
Yeah, that's right.
And I only believe in the universe. I don't believe in anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're all part of that universe. And when we die, we'll go back into that universe. All our molecular structure will go back into as atoms and into the dirt. We'll live in many other things.
That's
birds,
right.
worms, flowers,
Hey, tell us about, we're sort of up to date. Sharkmouth was in 2012. Van Diemen's Land was the next one. What about the third record in that trilogy, Red Dirt, Red Heart?
That's my favourite. That's the one that's the one I like the most. The first one was urban. It was about the back streets. Like I grew up in Richmond, so I'm very used. That was right in my intrinsic makeup. All the gangsters and the guys I went to school with became gangsters. You know, like 2 of them were involved in the Great Bookie robbery. 2 were involved in the diamond heist in Collins Street. You know, I knew all those guys, so I could write about things like that and feel that I knew it. The second album, I decided, when I was halfway through the first one, I thought there's a lot more stories, so I'll do a trilogy. Second album was the big picture of Australia, the bigger things, the convicts that came out here, the Eureka Stockade that changed things, Breaker Morant, which sort of changed a lot of things, the formation of the unions with the burning of the Rodney, the ship, the shearers went on strike. So that was a bigger type of album. Then the third album, which probably should have been the first album, it should have gone first to second to Sharkmouth. That's how it should have run. It should have run backwards. Yeah. But time is not linear, so they say. Anyway. No. So Einstein says it all happening at the same time. So I did the last one first, and I had to give, if I'm going to do a history of Australia, albeit very short, I had to include the Indigenous people who had been here for 40,000 years. So I included Pemulwuy, Bennelong. I wrote about the Kadija man, which I had to get permission to do. I didn't want to offend anyone. No. I wrote about the Nullarbor. And to me, that album evokes what I tried to capture, the emptiness, but also the fullness of the Nullarbor. It's the most amazing place to go, particularly at sunset. Stand out there and watch the sun go down, and you feel like time has stopped. And when the sun gets, and it gets blacker and blacker and blacker, and then you look at the sky and you go, oh my God, we are just specks. And that infinity, that feeling, and I feel we captured a bit of that in the album, and that's why that's my favourite of the 3. Plus, as I said, John Lee Hooker is one of my all-time favourites, and Kadija Man to me is along the lines of a John Lee Hooker style of song.
It feels like the perfect moment to finish up by asking you, Russell Morris, how important is it to have this Australian music vault to archive the stories of Australian music? And what is it, I suppose, 2-part question, how important is it? And Is there a distinctive character to Australian music?
I think there is a distinctive character, particularly if we start writing about our own situation. Some people have sort of fixated on making it overseas, so they tend to not. They're worried that it might be too parochial.
Yeah.
So they don't. So they tend to make their themes more universal, which I understand. That's fine if that's what you want to do. But some of the songs, even the universal ones, will go down in history. You know, Goiche's song. You know, that's going to go down. Oh, what a song. You know, and even though we still claim them, they're not ours. Crowded House will go down. Yes. Their songs will be because they're universal songs.
Yep.
Mine have been more parochial and even Midnight Oil to a certain extent. They tend to be more localised.
Yeah. Who else? Who are the other heroes, do you think?
Troy Cassar-Daley writes that way. Skyhooks wrote local songs, you know. Paul Kelly does. They're the songs that reflect us and reflect our situation. And I think it's important to record it. People in 30 years' time may not give a rat's, but at least we've put it down anyway.
Exactly. And you've been a big part of it. Thank you, Russell.
Thanks,
Absolutely
Brian.
Brilliant.
Pleasure. Ta.